Welcome everybody to this February AI Network Roundtable. I'm delighted to see our existing members, our new members and prospective members on the screen here today. As you know, the Roundtable is born out of the many conversations that we've been having with governments and businesses and academics in relation to not only the creation of the index, but also of the findings and the result of the Global AI Index, which is actually now in its third year. So the Roundtable was created to have these conversations in a more organized manner instead of the bilateral conversations that we were having, but also for people to share and present ideas with one another. So actually we are in the process of developing a function where that would allow for people to connect directly. But meanwhile, please do email me if you want to be put in touch with one another after an event. Also, a few notes on that. As always, we are programming, for the future and future roundtables. And also, please email me if you've got any particular topics that you want us to cover or presentations that you'd like to make. Just worth mentioning, for example, that in March we've got our session will be on health tech, and in April we'll be looking at fintech and fraud detection, while our May roundtable marks the biannual release of the index, and we will give a preview of the results at that roundtable. So, but please do send me any ideas and topics that you have particular interest in, and we'll take that into consideration. Finally, I'd like to just say that we will close this session at around 3:30, unless there are any burning questions that people want to stay on for. And throughout the next hour, please do weigh in with your thoughts and your questions in the chat. My colleague, Luke, will be our chat host, and the whole team actually behind the index is on the Zoom link and can answer any questions. I will now hand over to my colleague and fellow partner at Tortoise, Alexi Mostrous, who will be the moderator for the next hour on this session. And over to you, Alexi.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and welcome everybody to this AI Network meeting. Now, I think today is quite a special one for me as a journalist, because I'm interested as a journalist in kind of counterintuitive or surprising stories. And with all due respect to our amazing Global AI Index, the finding that the US and China were at the top of it wasn't that surprising. I think most people could have guessed at that position. But what is a story that emerged from the data is that smaller countries can really punch above their weight in AI, that you don't necessarily need the huge infrastructure or the money that Beijing or Washington has to really lead the way in the field. And it's within the grasp of many different countries to drive forward AI, both in terms of innovation and adoption. So I'm really excited today that at the AI Network, we've got three people who really know how to succeed in AI. They're not academics or people spouting, well, actually, they are academics, but they're also ministers. They're not people spouting theories on Twitter, though. They are ministers and ambassadors that represent countries that are doing really exciting things in this space. So today we're really in listening mode. We're going to listen to them quite carefully, telling us about what they think their blueprints are for AI success. How much is political leadership a factor? What is their approach to public-private collaboration? How much can they learn from the actions of other countries, and how much are they doing it for themselves? What is their reaction to COVID? Is it a threat or is it an opportunity? Without probably too long preamble, let me introduce you to our guests. Armen Appelbaum is Israel's chief scientist and chairman of its innovation authority. Jarmo Sareva is Finland's ambassador for innovation. I think he's the only ambassador for innovation in the world. And last but not least, Kyriakos Perakakis, the Minister of Digital Governance in Greece. We're delighted to have all three of you here. But just before we kick off the conversation, let me reiterate Alexandra's point that we've got so much talent in this virtual room, representatives from several different countries. And I think it's a real opportunity, if we can, to hear from you as much as possible. So we will have a conversation with the guests, but then it'd be great to bring in people who are listening and to hear your points of view about, if you're working in a government that you think is succeeding in the AI space, what are the ingredients of your success? If you're a business that's working with a government in an exciting way in this space, then tell us about that. We really hope that by the end of the discussion, we'll all have come to a better understanding of this topic. So look, let's turn to the guests now. Army, can I come to you first? Israel shot up to 5th place in our global AI index from, I think, 12th last year. It was a hugely impressive result. Can you just tell us, outline for us the reasons behind Israel's AI success? What are the key ingredients in your blueprint?
I can say in 2 words, private sector. It's all driven by the private sector, but with a government that realized that what we're experiencing today is gigantic, titanic change, as big as the first industrial revolution, or the second industrial revolution, or the third. We are living through the 4th industrial revolution, but it's very clear to us, and we mark it like that data science and AI is leading the 5th industrial revolution, and we're getting prepared for that. So the private sector in Israel, which came from many different sources, and a lot of, I would say, the academia and the defense, created in Israel already more than 1,400 companies. The private sector invested almost $4 billion in AI in 2019. And we have more than 40 R&D centers. With that, you're asking, and what the government do? So first of all, the government don't distract and don't disturb the progress. But that's not enough, because we already see today that there are multiple market failures going on with AI in Israel. One of the market failure, we don't have enough talent. As much as the academia happen to create and educate the AI talent, that's not enough, and we're short on AI talent. So the government looking into how to fund academia more. We see that we're short of infrastructure. We don't have, for example, high power computing in Israel. Then we're investing, the government going to invest in high power computing. We see that we do not actually have advanced natural language processing in Hebrew. We have a lot in English, but why any commercial company would like to develop in Hebrew and in Arabic? So we are developing now with the government a fund, NLP in Hebrew and Arabic, which I hope will be another vehicle to help create and the peace agreement, the Abraham Accord, and other collaboration between Israel and its immediate neighbor and a bit outside the neighbor. And the last and not least, the entire area of digitization of government offices. And we are in a plan. You mentioned that Israel is number 5 in the ranking, but in terms of the government, we are 51, if I'm not mistaken. So some will argue there is a blessing, government stay out, don't distract. But of course, we need the government to go in. And the 2 issue of digitizing the ministry, the offices, and I heard both, like in Greece and in Cyprus, our immediate neighbor, that they are really advancing in digitization their government, but also the whole area of regulation. And we would like to have what I call constructive regulation, meaning bringing the regulators early on in the game, work with them on all aspects, because as I said, artificial intelligence will impact every aspect of our life. and you need regulation in transportation, in medical, in agriculture. And we want to do it a step before it's become destruction, but rather a constructive. So all that ecosystem, which headed by the private sector, I think that's what driving us to get into the 5th place, which I was surprised to see, and I'm really happy for that.
I'm surprised that you were surprised. Can you, that's a really, really clear answer. And just before I turn to the others, could you expand on maybe 1 or 2 specific examples where private enterprise has been assisted by government in a way that has pushed forward AI innovation, either through the Innovation Council that you head or otherwise?
So the way we support the company is Israel Innovation Authority, which I'm the chairman of the board, is funding breakthrough technology with a public fund, and we are funding the private sector companies. We are distributing, last year we distributed about $700 million for companies. Of course, not all going to AI, actually the smaller amount, because the private sector is very effective there. But we still, when company come to us with a breakthrough technology that other, even VC will say, great, but it's too dangerous, too risky, we don't see real return, and most of the breakthrough technology is as such, then we, Israel Innovation Authority, actually jumping on this and funding at least 50%, where the other 50% you have to bring from home. So we're giving a matching fund. So that's one example. The other example where the government got involved is where we trigger the regulation, and the different ministry will fund part of the testing. For example, autonomous testing. I was just riding autonomous shuttle in some hospital area where you can hunt on the shuttle and go around the campus, and it goes with no driver, you know, like the train in many airports that you have like one car. But here it's going on the real road, and the people crossing the road. And again, the challenge here is to provide the regulation, and we kind of work with the Ministry of Transportation and Ministry of Justice in Israel, who are responsible for the regulation and the law, to come up with a regulation, to do the testing, and jointly to identify bugs in the regulations and close them as the testing. And we call it pilot testing. That we do when the product is ready and being launched to the customers, if you like, and both the customer and the regulators are testing themselves and testing the product. That's
so interesting that regulation should be developed in the same sort of breath as the product itself. Yeah, Jarmo, can I come to you? So Finland ranked 11th overall in our table, which is hugely impressive. Scored really highly in terms of government strategy, targets, research, and innovation. So potentially in the context of your 2017 report, I think that Finland released a big report into artificial intelligence strategy in 2017. Tell us about why you think Finland has been successful in AI, and give us some examples of kind of on-the-ground action that Finland has taken to ensure this success.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And firstly, listening to what Avi said about the challenges that Israel faces in terms of their talent, lack of talent. We face a growing rush for talent in AI globally, and that's clearly one of the challenges that we face. Yeah, we were indeed one of the first countries to launch a national artificial intelligence program back in 2017. It was entitled Finland's Age of Artificial Intelligence. And I think very much in line with how the Finnish society works. It set 3 goals to help the public sector to be more efficient, to make the business sector competitive, and thirdly, to facilitate a proactive society with active and well-informed citizens. And since the launch of the program, we have indeed done very well. It's not only your index, but we rank, for example, by McKinsey in the top quartile for AI readiness. And Oxford Insights has placed us, if I remember correctly, 5th in government AI readiness. So what is behind Finland's relative success? And of course, I think we're pretty ambitious people. I think there's a certain relentless pursuit of perfection on our part. And this never gets ready, and we're not big. We need to try and run twice as fast as the others to stay in place. But I think that the main things behind our success are, firstly, the fact that this is a country where we have traditionally been able to work across sectoral boundaries. It's the collaborative aspect of Finnish society between the government, including local government, business, universities and research institutes, and then of course civil society. So this is a country very much determined by a quadruple helix model. The second major thing is really a high level of trust. Finland ranks at the top, at least in Europe, in terms of the trust that people have in one another, and importantly, in the case of AI, in terms of trust in public institutions and trust in science and technology. We are a country very much believing in scientific and technological progress, with, of course, a healthy dose of skepticism. Things such as media literacy play a part. So it's really a combination of things. And finally, I would flag the role of the government. Like Abi, we of course want to make sure that the government does no harm. At the same time, the government sees its role as a leveler of the playing field, promoting smart regulation, like what Abi just referred to. And I guess compared to most other European countries, digital skills and the level of digitalization of the economy and of the government is very high. And I can perhaps come back to that later.
Absolutely. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the role of the government, do you see the government's role in the same way as Army does, which is to facilitate innovation in the private sector and kind of get out as soon as that process is complete? Or do you see it having a more overarching role to make sure that AI is implemented in a socially responsible way?
It is a facilitator, and the government doesn't want to stay involved any longer than it should. But I think the difference compared to many other European countries, and I would count Israel as a European country, the difference is that in the Nordics, the public sector has traditionally had a very central role in society. But over the past 10, 20 years, the role of government has really been transformed in most Nordic countries. And Alexandra, of course, knows this, hailing from Denmark. So yes, it is a facilitator, it is a convener, it provides a platform for bringing together all stakeholders in the society. And here I would again stress the fact that our success in this and in many other areas is a result of having a big tent, to use an American expression, having a big tent provided by the government in so many cases, where you create solutions there with a very pragmatic can-do and problem-solving mentality.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Look, I'm going to come to Kyriakos now, but afterwards, I think that we should go to a couple of people in the chat, because already some really good points are coming through. Kyriakos, Greece is in a slightly different position to Finland and to Israel. It hasn't released an AI strategy yet. There's a sense, I suppose, that its AI journey is just beginning, but we've seen, particularly in COVID, how the country has leveraged the crisis to really drive forward digital transformation in a number of areas and be really creative in that field. So can you just explain Greece's journey in the AI space, specific examples of where innovation has been really successful recently?
Thank you very much for the question and for being here. And let me begin by saying that I actually have the AI strategy in front of me. It's a draft. We will be publishing it in the next couple of months. Well, I have to admit that we're in the midst of a leapfrogging effort in Greece vis-a-vis digital. I mean, we didn't begin as a digital frontrunner back in 2019, but we have made significant strides. We're trying to cover a significant portion of the gap that exists between ourselves and countries such as Finland and Israel. And at the same time, we're also trying to innovate and develop certain solutions which, in our view, despite them not coming from a digital frontrunner, they're being viewed already as significant policy innovations. And let me give one example, which is interesting in the AI space as well, which is our strategy on 5G. And it answers certain amongst the questions that we already asked overall vis-a-vis the role of the state and how we envision it. So in 2019, Greece was quite back with regards to the design of its 5G spectrum auction. We managed to complete it in 12 months for all 4 bands on 5G. And there we had 2 significant policy innovations within it. The first one was that 25% of the proceeds of the revenues of the spectrum auction are consecrated towards the creation of a VC, of a specialized fund for the development of the 5G ecosystem. The fund, of course, will have a private sector acumen, because we're very much following the way Israel developed its ecosystem with Yozma, in the way in which we envision our ecosystem. And currently the managers are fundraising in order to augment the size of this fund. And at the same time, we didn't auction the whole spectrum, but we reserved a portion of it to offer free access to startups, to research centers, to universities, etc. So in a sense, this showcases how we view the role of the state. It has to be more strategic in the areas which are close to the technological frontier. In our strategy on AI, which will be released in the next couple of months, we're mostly following on the horizontal elements. First of all, we needed a strategy. We're publishing it now. We already published our overall digital strategy, which is also an implementation plan, which is more of a third industrial revolution document, let's say. The AI strategy focuses more on what is here and now and what is to come. We're capacity building on our infrastructural needs. I mentioned 5G, same on the cloud, same on IoT, same on a series of areas where we're currently developing a specific, a very, I say, ambitious footprint. And finally, we have in mind the use cases that we plan to start deploying. We started with a targeted algorithm on the Greek border to target the cases of COVID, to target the tests of COVID for those who were coming to Greece last summer. We did this together with Greek scientists from abroad, from the United States. It has been proven to be quite a success so far. So this was actually a very targeted AI project, which in a sense accustomed citizens and accustomed Greeks to the very significant uses of AI should it be put into proper use, especially during a pandemic. We plan to move ahead in a much higher speed than what I have already described. We plan to develop a full spectrum of use cases across all verticals in the Greek government. And the RRF, the consecrated fund that the EU advances post-COVID for the reconstruction, for the economic reconstruction, at least 20% of that fund should be on digital. So part of those financing capabilities will go towards, let's say, a classical gap analysis, the classical systems that we need to put in place to cover the pre-existing gap. But many amongst them will also be targeted towards specific AI projects, which will have significant added value. On that note, we're currently deploying a very ambitious effort.
That's so interesting. We'll come back to COVID in a bit, but just to pick up on Jarmo's point about public trust, Kyriakos, do you think that there will be a kind of ability to transfer citizens' willingness to give up their data for anti-COVID measures after the pandemic? Do you think that will translate into a wider willingness to be involved in AI innovation and digital innovation?
First of all, I fully embrace Jarmo's point. I believe that digital technologies have a Jenga quality, like the Jenga game, where if you remove specific portions of the construction, everything can collapse. It's difficult to build, but easy to make it collapse. We tried to do this a lot with our digital platforms during COVID as a government. We deployed a full spectrum of digital platforms overall, and we had an acute understanding of what Yuval Harari had written in the FT, that after the pandemic will leave, after the pandemic will not be here, your digital decisions will remain, and that all those digital decisions have a very acute political essence, which you always need to take into account. So as a government, we tried to embrace an empowerment standpoint to all the technological solutions that we embraced. We took an already existing strategy to diminish Greek bureaucracy, to increase productivity, etc. And we tried to render it a tool to battle the virus. Every citizen-state interaction that we were digitizing, in a sense, was less of a reason to visit a public sector guichet. So we try to have this empowerment narrative at the core, and we understand that as technological complexity increases, and it does so specifically with AI, trust needs to be built step by step, platform by platform, decision by decision. And you need to be quite transparent when you're making those decisions, and especially during crisis management. So to summarize, I fully embrace the point, but this is what we're trying to do, not only with AI, with every single digital decision, with every single piece of legislation, with every single platform.
Thank you so much. Look, we've got so much to talk about, but let me bring in a couple of people from the chat. Can we go to Armel Kabul, please? I think Armel is a former member of the Tunisian government, and she's made a great point about how most leaders, especially government leaders, do not understand AI.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I was very lucky to be invited by, now it's Joseph Borrell, who leads the EU Tech Panel, which is actually bringing, leaders from the tech industry with government leaders to talk about, AI, the consequences, etc. And I was very shocked because we had the chance to meet, various defense ministers. We worked on semi-autonomous AI weapons as one subject, and it was very clear that they knew almost nothing, and I remember for me a huge role model was Risto, who's also a member of the tech panel, who was the chairman of Nokia at that time, and who told me, Amel, you cannot delegate this. He said, I myself sat down and did MOOCs and educated myself about machine learning and AI to be able to make better decisions while being chairman of Nokia. I could not delegate this just to the technical people. And I think our governments and ministers also cannot delegate this because the consequences are really far reaching. And maybe the other very short, not shocking, but we had some CEOs of big AI companies coming to the EU tech panel and saying, please regulate us. You know, we know what we're kind of creating here is massive. And we need your role to play, we need you to play different roles, but you can only regulate smartly if you also understand, you know, what's going on and what the consequences are. And I think that it's very complex, is an excuse that I don't accept. You know, we have to deliver better for our citizens, and that's our role also to do the hard work and understand what this is.
Well, talk to me a bit about in what ways they didn't understand. Was it a technical misunderstanding or an ethical misunderstanding? How did it manifest itself?
Honestly, it may sound too banal, but it's just like not spending time on it, you know, like not even, you know, taking a course on it or asking for a deeper briefing on it, you know, like, and obviously there are the technical pieces, but there are ethical pieces, there are decision-based pieces, there are consequences. And it's, you know, it's bloody hell just sitting down and spending some hours trying to understand that. And obviously I understand that defense ministers all over the world and other government members, I've been in government minister myself, you're busy from morning till evening. But I think this is too big to be delegated. And then you have some technical people coming in, and if you can't even ask them the right questions, how are you supposed to make the right decisions? So, so I think there are some role models out there, but we need to push much, much further. We need to hold our governments accountable for not delegating AI to the technical people.
Since we're talking about a blueprint for success in this session, is there an example that you can think of where ministers have taken the time to understand the intricacies of what they're dealing with in terms of AI?
Sorry, sadly, no, I don't know of any.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to take your point and come to Army and put it to him. I mean, Armen makes her point is a really important one, because it suggests that unless ministers at a very high level get themselves absorbed into the technical data, that they just won't know even what they don't know. They won't know what knowns are unknown and what knowns are known, and they won't know what questions to ask their advisors. And this might have a real kind of structural impact on AI innovation in all sorts of ways. How do you answer her point?
So I don't think that a politician that busy with many other tasks has the time to really get understanding of the details. I would say a lower level or deeper level of understanding of AI. What I think they need to understand, they need to rely on people like us that are technical people who are, I would say, can provide the impact, the significant, the interest of and the consequences of what AI capable to in terms of bringing value and in terms of destroying value. Unfortunately, I cannot take the credit and say that the politicians in Israel who are busy for the past 2 years just to be re-elected once after time have the time to, but that said, there are, I would say, professional infrastructure like myself. I spent my entire career in the private sector. I came to the public sector only 3.5 years ago. And we are heading and leading the technology side and the government involvement in that side. So unless you have a government that is all created by professionals, then you have a professional medical doctor for health, and you have a lawyer for justice and a ministry, which is in most Western countries, that's not the case, I would say, necessarily. So they have to be rely on one level down for their technology and listen to them. But eventually what's important, I would say, the policies. What kind of policies you set?
Thank you. Let's go to Mark Shan now, who we can say, I think, represents Canada in terms of its AI innovation. Canada is another country that has performed very well on our index. And so, Mark, it would just be great to hear your perspective about what you think is a blueprint for success in terms of Canada's own position.
Thanks so much, Alexi. And yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a number of things probably that we've tried to bring to bear for Canada in terms of our relative success. And one, I guess, you know, we've been at this a while. I know in some regards we had the first national strategy in 2017, but you have to go back a ways to remember in some ways that, you know, in the 80s, you know, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research and the National Sciences and Research Council and the National Research Council in its entirety were providing support for high-risk research projects at the time around artificial intelligence, including setting up a research group on AI built by Geoffrey Hinton over the several decades that were really the kind of precursor to our AI strategy in 2017. I guess in some ways, our strategy was predicated on the notion to really secure the fundamental research and talent base that we feared, absent a very strong government signal and the kind of resources around it that we risked losing, and we risked kind of losing our potential comparative advantage. We also, I guess, have tried to use some of our, you know, the classical stereotypical Canadian approaches to things. One is kind of convening power, which we've done both in the national context with having national institutes across the country that are trying to bring together the various research strands, and then also the commercialization attempts. But then also even on the global scale, which obviously was the motivator for the global partnership on artificial intelligence, and the desire there to create international norms and the capacity for engagement to be able to lay that groundwork. And then similarly, I think, you know, we're still kind of working towards a greater degree of commercialization and implementation on the private sector side. But, you know, if I look at the minister's own AI advisory council, you know, a group there around public communications and engagement, you know, a dedicated stream of advice to the minister, trying to look at how to build trust and kind of create some of that fundamental conception. So I'd say it's, you know, for us, it's been talent, you know, continued application, convening, and then just continued reiteration.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Let's go to a couple of people in the chat, because some people are effectively pressing our guests in terms of issues such as regulation of AI. And I wondered if Tim El-Sheikh was around, because he's made a very, very interesting point in the chat about governments failing to regulate social media, and potentially AI is 100 times worse. Tim, are you there? If he's not, then don't worry, we can just summarize his point. He's saying, as a CEO of an AI company, he wants to be regulated, and he's pushing for more regulation. So I'll just take that point, and I'll also take a point made by Jackie in the chat, which is that she's heard, in terms of the Finnish implementation of AI, that there was a lot of conflict with the unions about changes to working practices. So let's go back, if we can, to Jarmo, and ask you a specific question about how AI implementation has worked in respect of safeguarding working practices, safeguarding employee rights, but also what do you think about the long-term question about developing regulation almost in lockstep with developing the actual technology, so that the technology doesn't outpace the regulation?
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, I haven't witnessed the kind of controversy with the unions specific to AI. I think it's rather, we have probably one of the lowest proportions in the labor force of people whose jobs can be actually made redundant through AI, because our economy, we're basically a self-service society, a high-skill society, and one study I read was that 9% of the Finnish workforce can be made redundant through automation, through AI, and other new technologies. In Germany, the same study says the figure is 30. So I haven't really seen that. But regarding the long-term issue of regulation, yes, I have heard the same call from many industries, from many companies, and from inside the tech giants and social media giants. You know, people working in the social media companies, for example, who feel that they desperately need better regulation. And really, what is at stake here is nothing less than the future of open societies and democracy, because the unregulated nature of social media has led to a situation where we no longer are able to share, the basic, shared understanding of what is true and what is false. What are the facts and what are the unfacts, and therefore I think that this is really a key. And I would also contest the notion that ethical AI is bad for AI business. On the contrary, ethical and trustworthy AI is good for business because consumers will flock to the products and services of those companies that they deem to be trustworthy, and that's good for those companies.
Jarmo, could you talk specifically about what Finland has done to make sure that regulation has kept up with AI innovation?
Well, of course, we're a member of the European Union, and therefore we are following the EU regulations, and as you know, there's a number of legislative initiatives currently in place at the European level. What I would rather stress is that we have emphasized what I referred to earlier, for example, media literacy and critical thinking, starting with the school curriculum, which empowers citizens to be informed. And one of the key goals of the Finnish AI strategy was to strengthen an empowered citizenry with and human agency. But when it comes to specific regulation, one key area, of course, has to do with social media companies and the lack of self-regulation on their part. This is not so much about regulating the technologies themselves, because the technologies are out there. It's more about regulating the use of technologies.
Thank you. That's great. Kyriakos, let's turn to you now. I'm interested in Greece's example because it seems to have not exhibited a consistent growth path. There has been a relatively slow period of development and then a relatively fast period of development, and that suggests that quite a lot of what Greece has been through in terms of AI development is down to political will and someone at the top saying, we got to do this. This is a priority. Is that true? And do you think the political will is an essential part of Greece's blueprint?
I think that to a certain extent, you need to do both. You need to have both political will at the top, but you also need to have capacity building at the bottom. And in that sense, on the development of our venture capital ecosystem, which is quite interesting and which emerged in the startup scene that we have in Greece in the last 10 years, there it was more of a bottom-up process, but we had the right policies at the top. On digital transformation overall, I have to admit that the key institutional design at the top, the creation of a new ministry, the fact, to answer a point which was raised previously, that we recruited people from all sides of the industry. In this new ministry, we have both classical politicians who are technically literate, but also people from the private sector, also people from the startup scene, also lawyers who are very deeply knowledgeable of data regulations and the emerging regulatory needs of new technologies. We have tried to create a mosaic, a mix of people who can collectively deliver change in a very speedy manner. Had we not been collectively literate, let's say, not only on AI, but I would say on digital transformation overall, on certain layers and facets of digital, we wouldn't have been able to address the needs of the pandemic. We wouldn't have been able to deliver platforms in 2 or 3 days. We wouldn't have been able to develop a vaccine platform, which is one of the, I think, better functioning in the world right now. Overall, you need to have both, I think. But what you are asking, in a sense, has within at its core a gap which says that if it's only political will at the top, then if the political top changes, then a country will not have a sustainable growth and a sustainable development overall. And this is why we're trying to consecrate lots of our efforts in the development of permanent entities within the public sector, of permanent structures which will continue to deliver change after the ministers change and after the political level changes. But given the skills, let's say, gap which we have right now, because technologies are changing very quickly, we need to continuously reskill our people. This is much of a challenge, but it's a challenge that we're trying to address.
And how much is collaboration a key part of what Greece is trying to do now? I know that before, when you were constructing your AI and digital strategies, you went out to countries like the UK and to Finland and to Estonia to see what they were doing. But how much of what you're trying to do now is based on a blueprint that you yourself have learned from elsewhere?
Reforms are a little bit like transplants. You need to have donor-receiver compatibility. So you can be inspired by others. You can learn lots of things by others, but you have to be eclectic vis-a-vis what you pick to endorse and implement in your own paradigm. So we learned a lot from the Estonians on their national ID cards. We learned a lot from the UK on the development of gov.uk and what the government digital service did in 2011. We learned a lot by Israel from the development of their VC ecosystem and cybersecurity structures. But in a sense, in order to guarantee this compatibility, you need to have your own paradigm and you need to be very specific about how you implement things here. So because IT, overall digital, AI, those are horizontal projects. Governments have been traditionally good at verticals and traditionally not as good on horizontals. Digital is the classical case of a horizontal project. And this is why collaboration is much of a necessity. But I have to say, apart from collaboration, which is the necessary condition, you also have a sufficient condition, which is that this project needs, at the end of the day, be the project of the head of state or head of government herself or himself. And this is the only way in which you can push forward very quickly with change. And this is the case here, and this is what we learned from the successful cases.
Thank you. I'm beginning to love the imagery in this session. We've had Jenga as an image for the AI ecosystem. We've had human heart transplants, and I think in the Finnish AI document they described AI as Popeye's spinach. So we can add that to the mix too. I want to come back to Armen in a little bit to ask about how collaboration works for Israel. But let me just go to a couple of people in the chat first. Frederic Bouchard, are you around? I think you've got a good question about allocating resources.
Yes, certainly. I'm just curious, and this is a question we're also asking ourselves in Canada, and Mark and his team is within government. But I think given the limited resources that our respective countries have, and the time, the race at which countries are building these things, curious to hear how your respective countries prioritize capacity. Do you prioritize capacity building to build your ecosystem and have your domestic giants and players that from there on can bring back sort of that value to your respective economies, or do you focus on the adoption front and how that could bring economic value just to get your companies in these very key sectors to remain competitive?
Before I put your question to the panelists, what do you think the answer is?
I think it depends what the landscape of your country is at the very start. In Canada, we were blessed to have a lot of talent to start with. I think our main issue is on the commercialization front. We don't have a big domestic market to adopt, and frankly, we're not really good at adopting deep tech. Just like speaking from my personal experience at Element, we exported 75% of our solutions and services, which means that, yes, there's a lot of resources that are being poured in building domestic capacity, but if that is being driven towards external competitors in key industries that Canada is competitive in, then I think, yes, there's value being derived from sort of the investment that are being poured domestically into capacity building for productive AI companies. But I think there's a question to be asked about how do we sort of complete that loop so that everyone within the economy can benefit from it.
Thank you. Armen, do you have a response to the question? And after that, I want to ask you about collaboration.
If I understood the question correct, then I would argue that we need to let the market force, to the private sector and the market power to drive it, where the government in that case need to stimulate priorities that they want to enhance in the country. I don't believe, although we see many countries that put constraints, higher tax, and trying to block all kinds of initiatives, I don't believe on that. I much strongly believe on giving the carrots, not the stick, and that the government will stimulate via, like Israel Innovation Authority, giving some a public fund into the private sector in area that the government would like to enhance. And also to work globally from day one and try to keep the core of technology and management in your home country, but go globally from the get-go. Because the market is huge, the opportunity is huge, and if you have a strong economically company that can do business globally, then it will be much more difficult to take it out, and more difficult to kind of, and I know what you're talking about Canada, that a lot of the invention and technology are being sucked out into the US, into the Silicon Valley, instead of staying in Canada.
Let me, I'm conscious that we haven't got much time left at all. I can't believe the hour's gone by so quickly. So let me just put a point to each of the panelists, and then I'll come to a couple of people in the chat, and then we'll unfortunately have to wrap up. Let's talk about COVID and what it's done to AI innovation and what it's taught each of you about what your country is good at in terms of AI innovation. Armen, I mean, Israel, I suppose, has had to develop technology historically because of necessity. I'm thinking of things like food security right. and water technology, for instance. What do you think the way that Israel responded to COVID shows you about Israel's AI ecosystem more widely? And then I'll come to Jarmo and then Kyriakos.
A big regret that we did not have a much larger AI and database, and that regret is now being translated into action to enhance data collection, digitizing the government. But all that said, we got to keep the public trust in this data collection, the public trust in the security of the systems. And that can be, and especially when you talk about medical and health data, which is very, very sensitive. And that need to be now, I would say in Israel, one of the highest priority for us. But if we would have the plan that we had many years back to have a genomic map of the Israel population, and with all this COVID infected people that no one can understand why they got infected, those got it hard, those, God forbid, passed away, and those that have no symptom. But and no one understands it. But if we had a more, I would say, genetic data, we could relay it, maybe, potentially, and have a better understanding of the root cause of COVID-19 and what will be in the next pandemic. What I wish for all of us, that in the next pandemic, we will be more prepared. Science, and I trust a lot the AI and the big data to be the vehicle to better fight the next, I don't know what to call it, COVID-20, God forbid, but something else that clearly will hit us. It's only question when and how well we'll be prepared. But I think that's opportunity. It's always the necessity, and the economy is willing and have to put resources into it.
Thank you.
And make money out of that also.
And make money out of it. Jarmo, very, very quickly for you, in the AI strategy that you published, it was purposefully broad in terms of its objectives. And I wonder if COVID has narrowed the objectives at all of what you're trying to do with AI. Is it more now focused on health? Is it more focused on those areas, or is it still as wide as it was?
It is still wide. It has, of course, accentuated the need for and opportunities provided by health AI. And in this sense, I would just flag the Finnish law, which probably was the first in the world on the secondary use of health data, properly anonymized. So it has accentuated the need for and opportunities, but it has not narrowed the scope. Life will go on, but as Avi said, there will be other pandemics, hopefully not soon, but we need to be prepared. And what this pandemic has shown to us is the importance of resilience in terms of infrastructure, your IT infrastructure and your health infrastructure. And AI will be an ever more important part of that. Let me just say one thing on the resources. We're a small country. We are not China. We can't throw money in the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars into AI research. What we can do and what we have done is to throw money or provide money, firstly, to the enabling environment, especially education, such as the large-scale MOOCs, and secondly, provide money to the industrial areas where we already are strong, such as B2B AI. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really, really good. I'm being told in no uncertain terms that we've got to close up in a few minutes. I just want to come, if I might, to Tim Gordon, who is asking effectively what we as the UK can learn from the countries represented here. But Tim, do you want to go ahead and make the point?
No, I think you answered my question brilliantly. I think the question is, we've had 3 very interesting presentations from very fast and speedy and quite cohesive countries. Looking at the UK, which obviously has some advantages of scale, but probably disadvantages of speed and cohesiveness. What advice would you have for us as we look to the next phase of post-Brexit global Britain? And I guess especially interesting maybe is where you'd seek to collaborate with the UK as we begin to think about how we build our next web of global AI alliances.
Okay, even though we've gone over time, I'm going to come to Kyriakos and then the other two to please answer Tim's question briefly and succinctly.
We'll also combine this with the previous question about what we learned during COVID, because I think that certain of these lessons are actually close. We took the decision to develop, very much inspired by the UK, I have to say, to develop a ministry on digital, which is focused not only on strategic, but on operational matters as well. It became an operational hub, a hub of operations, where we developed new solutions and we brought talent in a very similar manner to the GDS, but it's a very cohesive structure under the Prime Minister's office, which is doing significant capacity building. The best lesson that we learned is that if you make it, they will come, as in the movie. You build it, you bring the best people over, you develop a strategy, you have an operational plan, collaboration and networks play a huge role, and everything will sort out in the end. And I have to say that we have very close collaboration with the UK government, even right now, with the government digital service. So we would be very much interested to deepen this collaboration on matters of AI and on strategic vertical pillars.
Well, I very much hope that this conversation might forge some of those links, Kyriakos. Thank you so much. Jarmo, very quickly, what advice for the UK?
I'd like to give you the advice of reversing Brexit, but that's another story. Public services, I think that's an area where we can offer quite a bit. Digitalization of public services, that's one thing. AI education, both for the masses and in the business sector, because there's enough technical understanding of AI in businesses, but less of an understanding of what AI can provide for your business case, the opportunity. And thirdly, on talent. And there probably we would like to poach some of the talent from the UK. Just kidding.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And lastly, Armi, a couple of words on the advice that you give the UK.
Who am I to give advice to the UK? But the biggest advice I can give in the spirit of this meeting is really collaborations. I see a lot of opportunities for real collaborations down to a project, and the Horizon Europe that coming up now together is a beautiful opportunities. And I think that that's collaboration, especially for small countries like Israel, or for that matter, Finland and other. It's a multiplier, multipliers of opportunities, and keeping the trust. I think there is nothing more important for us to tell our government again and again. And I read through the chats here a lot of distrust with a different government, and we will not be able to afford it, because if in AI, in all those systems, which will get all over our life, I would say, if we will not build it right, layer after layer, and will keep the trust, eventually people will kick it and will not use it, and that will be a big loss for those who will not. So I think trust is a key word in this new era that we're heading to.
Thank you so much. It's interesting that you said trust, because from my perspective, even though all 3 countries represented today are quite different in quite different positions, trust came across as a kind of leitmotif running through this entire discussion. Normally, I would sum up more points that were made by the speakers and by the panelists and the attendees, but we've gone so over time that I'm just going to thank everyone so much for coming. We hope to see you at more events in the future. Thanks so much to our panelists, and we hope that hopefully we can be some sort of fulcrum where collaboration between nations, between businesses in this space can really push forward. So until next time, thanks so much. Have a nice afternoon.